A man shoved two armed strangers off a woman he'd never spoken to in a dark parking lot, outnumbered with nothing but his bare hands and a reason he couldn't explain. That woman was his boss, the most feared CEO in the freight industry. The woman who had never once learned his name in 3 years. He carried her out of that parking lot, brought her home, and kept watch all night while his 8-year-old daughter slept in the next room. And when she woke up, disoriented, embarrassed, wrapping herself in borrowed dignity, the first thing she said was, "Did anything happen last night?" Drop a comment with your city. Let me know how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The gala was the kind of event Daniel Carr had no business attending. Not because he wasn't invited. He had an invitation. A stiff, cream-colored card, embossed with the Titan Freight Corporation logo, slid under his cubicle door 3 weeks ago with a sticky note that read, "Mandatory." No exceptions. But mandatory for the warehouse auditors meant something different than mandatory for the executives. For the executives, mandatory meant show up in a tailored suit, shake hands with people who matter, and be seen. For Daniel, mandatory meant don't embarrass the company. He'd pressed his one good blazer the night before. He'd triple-knotted his tie in the bathroom mirror while his daughter Sophie watched from the doorway in her pajamas, her inhaler clutched in one small hand like a security blanket. "You look fancy, Daddy," she said. "I look like I'm trying," he said back. She giggled. That sound, that small, pure sound, was the only good thing that happened to him all week. The drive to the Meridian Grand Hotel took 40 minutes. He spent most of it running numbers in his head. The hospital bill from Sophie's last ER visit, $612. His rent due in 9 days. His truck insurance, which he'd quietly let lapse 2 months ago because he couldn't cover both that and her asthma medication. The math never came out right. It hadn't come out right in almost 2 years, not since Rebecca left. Not since Rebecca disappeared. He never said that word to people disappeared. He said left. Because disappeared opened a door he wasn't ready to walk through. Not while Sophie still asked about her mother sometimes at bedtime. Not in a demanding way. Just a quiet, wondering way, like she was trying to solve a puzzle nobody gave her all the pieces to. The hotel lobby hit him like a different planet. Crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves moving through the crowd with champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. Women in gowns that cost more than his monthly rent. Executives from the upper floors of Titan Freight men, and women he recognized from company photos but had never actually spoken to. Laughing that particular rich laugh, the one that doesn't have anything to prove. Daniel took a glass of sparkling water from a tray and found a corner. That was his strategy for the night. Corner, water, clock. 2 hours minimum before leaving looked rude. He could survive 2 hours. He pulled out his phone and checked the time, 7:43 p.m. He texted his neighbor, Mrs. Holt, who was sitting with Sophie. "Everything good?" The reply came in 30 seconds. "We're watching Moana for the 4th time this week. Go enjoy yourself." He put his phone away and looked out at the room. That was when he saw her. Charlotte, no, he corrected himself. Ms. Bennett. Everyone called her Ms. Bennett, even the executives who'd worked alongside her for 15 years. She was standing near the far side of the room with 3 board members dressed in a steel gray gown, and even from across a crowded ballroom, you could feel the authority coming off her. She wasn't loud about it. She didn't need to be. She had the kind of presence that made a room quietly reorganize itself around her without anyone realizing they were doing it. They called her the Iron Lady. Not to her face. Never to her face. Daniel had seen her twice in 3 years, once at an all-hands company meeting, once in the elevator, where she'd looked at him the way you look at the floor numbers briefly without registering anything. He didn't take it personally. He was a level 4 auditor. She ran a $30 billion company. The math on that social gap was simple. He nursed his sparkling water for an hour. He talked to 3 people, a woman from HR who asked him what department he was in, a man from logistics who complained about the parking, and a server who offered him a crab puff. He said yes to the crab puff. It was the highlight. At 9:15, he decided 2 hours was close enough to 2 hours and began moving toward the exit. He was almost there, coat in hand, keys in pocket, when he noticed something wrong. He couldn't have said exactly what it was at first. Just a shift in the texture of the room. A cluster of people near the side hallway that led to the hotel's private exit had a different energy than the rest of the party. Too still. Too deliberate. He paused. Two men, large, dressed in dark suits that fit differently from the other dark suits in the room, less tailored and more functional, were on either side of a woman guiding her toward the side hallway. From a distance, it looked like an escort, like colleagues helping someone who'd had too much to drink. Except Daniel had been watching people move all night, and the woman between them wasn't leaning on them. She was being held. He couldn't see her face, but he could see her shoes. Gray heels, the kind that matched a steel gray gown, and the way her feet were moving slow and uncoordinated, but not willing, not quite, still dragging slightly in a way that said her body was fighting, even when her mind couldn't organize it. Daniel stood there for 3 full seconds. "This isn't your problem," said the voice in his head that sounded like every sensible decision he'd ever made. "You have a daughter at home. You have bills. You have nothing to gain and everything to lose." He dropped his coat on a chair. He walked, not running, because running would draw attention, would cause a scene, would give the two men time to push her through that door before he got there. He moved like a man with somewhere to be, cutting through the edge of the crowd, keeping his eyes on the gray heels. He made it to the hallway 30 seconds before they reached the door. He stepped in front of them. "Hey." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Where are you taking her?" The larger of the two men looked at him with the flat professional assessment of someone who has handled interruptions before. "Back off. She's fine. Too much champagne." "She doesn't look fine." "I said back off." The man's voice dropped. "This isn't your concern." Daniel looked at the woman between them. Her eyes were open, but glassy, struggling to focus. She opened her mouth and something came out. Not words, just a sound. A low, effortful sound, like she was trying to call up from somewhere deep underwater. He looked at the second man's hand where it gripped her arm. The knuckles were white. "Let her go," Daniel said. The first man moved first, not toward Daniel, but toward the door, pushing the woman forward. And that was the last moment Daniel thought about his job, his bills, his truck insurance, his sensible life. He grabbed the larger man's collar with both hands and pulled him backward with every pound he had. Which wasn't much because Daniel was built lean and the man outweighed him by 40 pounds. But surprise is its own kind of weight, and the man went off balance, crashing sideways into the wall. The second man released the woman and turned on Daniel. What followed was not a clean fight. It was not the kind of thing you'd see in a movie. It was 20 seconds of ugly close-quarters chaos in a corporate hallway, elbows and walls, and one very hard introduction between Daniel's shoulder and the door frame, and by the end of it, Daniel had a split lip, and the second man had a broken nose, and both of them had enough sense to recognize that the noise was going to draw people in 30 seconds. The two men looked at each other. Then they left. Not running, walking fast controlled the way professionals retreat. Daniel stood in the hallway, breathing hard, and looked down. The woman from the gala was on the floor, her back against the wall, knees pulled up, eyes blinking slowly, like someone surfacing from a deep dive. In the better light of the hallway, her face was unmistakable. It was Ms. Bennett. It was the CEO. Daniel crouched down in front of her. "Ms. Bennett, can you hear me?" Her eyes found his face. She looked at him like she was trying to place him, like he was a word she knew but couldn't quite pronounce. She started. Stopped. Tried again. "Don't let them." "They're gone," he said. "They're gone. You're safe." She closed her eyes. Opened them. "Who are you?" "Daniel Carr. I work in auditing. Level 4. He realized immediately how useless that information was and almost laughed. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay? Can you stand?" "I don't." She shifted, tried to push herself up, and her arms buckled. "Something's wrong with me." "I know. I think someone put something in your drink." The look that crossed her face, then not fear exactly. Something worse. Something that said, "I know exactly who would do that, and I know why." "I can't." She looked down the hallway back toward the ballroom. "I can't go back in there." "I know. I can't go to a hospital. If this gets out, Her voice sharpened for a moment, cutting through whatever was fogging her system. "If it gets out that I was—" "I'm not taking you to a hospital," he said. He didn't know why he said it. It was not a decision he'd consciously made. It was just the next thing that was true. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. Can you stand if I help you?" She looked at him for a long moment. Even drugged. Even diminished. There was something in her eyes that was still assembling information, still calculating, still deciding. "Yes," she said. He got her arm over his shoulder, and they moved together slowly, carefully out the hotel's side exit and into the parking lot, past two valets, who looked at them and said nothing, because rich people do strange things at galas. And it's not the valet's problem to Daniel's 11-year-old truck, with the cracked passenger mirror, and the Sophie-related handprints on the window. He buckled her into the passenger seat. She was fading fast, her head lolling against the headrest. "Stay with me," he said. "Just stay awake a little longer. I need to know, is there someone I can call? Someone you trust?" She laughed. It was a short, hollow sound. "That's a shorter list than you'd think." He pulled out of the parking lot and drove. His apartment was 40 minutes away. Small. 2 bedrooms. Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator. Rent 9 days overdue. Nothing in it that had any right to belong to a billionaire CEO. He carried her from the truck she'd gone fully under by the time he pulled in up the stairs of his building, past his neighbor Mr. Tran's door, where a television murmured through the wall, and into his apartment. He put her in his bedroom, removed her heels, pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. She looked in that moment nothing like the Iron Lady. She looked like a woman who'd had something taken from her and hadn't finished deciding what to do about it. He texted Mrs. Holt. "Sophie, okay, I'm home. Don't need to stay, but can you sleep on the couch just in case?" And then he made himself a cup of coffee he didn't particularly want and sat in the armchair in his living room facing the front door. He didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., Sophie padded out in her socks to get a glass of water and found him sitting there. "Daddy, why are you in the chair?" "Couldn't sleep, baby. Go back to bed." "Is someone in your room?" He looked at her. Sophie was 8 years old and missed nothing. "A coworker," he said. "She got sick at the party. She's just sleeping." Sophie considered this with the gravity of a judge reviewing evidence. "Did you give her my purple blanket?" "I gave her my blanket." "Oh." Satisfied. "Okay." She turned to go back, then stopped. "Daddy, you've got something on your lip." "I know. It looks like when Jimmy Marks fell off his bike." "Something like that," he said. "Go to bed, Soph." She went. He sat in the armchair and watched the dark, quiet apartment, and thought about 2 men in dark suits and knuckles gone white around a woman's arm, and a list of trusted names that was shorter than it should be. He thought about Sophie's inhaler on her nightstand, about the hospital bill on his kitchen counter, about Rebecca wherever she was. He thought about the necklace Sophie always wore, the little silver chain with the small charm that Rebecca had left behind. The only thing she'd left behind. And he thought about how many threads a person's life was actually made of, how many invisible connections running in every direction, and how you could live your whole life not knowing what any of them were attached to. Outside, the city was quiet. He held his coffee and he waited for morning. Morning came the way it always did in Daniel Carr's apartment with Sophie. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She materialized at the kitchen doorway at 6:47 a.m. in her fleece pajamas, with the cartoon clouds on them. Hair completely sideways, inhaler already in her hand. Out of habit, and she looked at her father sitting in the armchair where she'd left him 3 hours earlier, and said with the flat authority of someone who has seen a lot, "You didn't sleep." "I slept a little." In the chair. The chair's comfortable. Sophie looked at him the way she looked at answers she didn't believe. Then she climbed into his lap, tucked her head under his chin, and said nothing else for a while. He held her and felt the specific weight of her 38 pounds of trust and stubbornness, and for a few minutes the night before almost felt like something that had happened to someone else. Almost. "Is she still here?" Sophie asked into his chest. "Yeah." "Is she okay?" "I think so. She just needed to sleep." Sophie was quiet again. Then, "She must not have a daddy to take care of her." Daniel pressed his lips to the top of his daughter's head and didn't say anything. He made Sophie breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the same breakfast he'd made 400 mornings in a row, and she ate at the kitchen table with a library book propped against the juice glass, reading while she chewed, completely at peace with the fact that there was a stranger sleeping in her father's bed. Sophie had a gift for accepting the world as it presented itself. He'd always admired that about her. He'd always worried it came from having too early an education and things not going according to plan. At 7:20, he heard movement from the bedroom. He set a mug of coffee on the counter black because he had no idea how she took it, and black was at least honest, and waited. She came out slowly. Charlotte Bennett in the daylight of his small kitchen, wearing yesterday's gown and last night's complicated expression, looked like a woman assembling herself in real time. Her hair was down. Her mascara had traced 2 careful lines under her eyes during the night. She was barefoot, carrying her heels in one hand, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw Sophie at the table. Sophie looked up from her book. "Good morning. I'm Sophie. My dad made eggs. Do you want some?" Charlotte blinked. Yes. Thank you." She sat across from Sophie at the kitchen table, as if she'd been given a direct order. Daniel put the coffee in front of her. She wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't speak for a moment, just breathed. Sophie went back to her book. Daniel leaned against the counter and waited. Finally, Charlotte looked up at him. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been at 3 a.m., but they were doing that same thing they'd done in the hotel hallway, assembling, calculating, deciding. Whatever she'd been given the night before was wearing off, but it was leaving something careful behind. "Thank you," she said, quietly, like the word cost her something. "You don't have to." "Don't have. I know I don't have to." She held his gaze. "I'm saying it anyway. Because I want to." She glanced at Sophie, then back at him. "Those men. Do you know who they were?" "No. I'd never seen them before." She nodded slowly, like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Did anything happen?" she asked. "Last night, after you brought me here." The question dropped into the kitchen and sat there. "You slept," he said. "I sat in the chair, that's all." She studied him for a long, steady moment. Then something in her shoulders, something she'd been holding without knowing she was holding, it released. "I believe you," she said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was more like a verdict, like she'd run him through a process and he'd passed. He wasn't sure how he felt about being assessed in his own kitchen before 8 in the morning, but he let it go. Sophie looked up from her book. "Your dress is really pretty. It's like the moon." Charlotte looked at the girl and something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that lives just underneath a smile. "Thank you. I borrowed the color from the sky." Sophie considered this seriously. "That's a good idea. I borrow colors from stuff too. My backpack is the same color as the creek behind our school." "That's very intentional of you," Charlotte said. "My dad says I'm very intentional." "Your dad is right." Daniel watched his daughter charm the most powerful woman in the freight industry over scrambled eggs, and felt something in his chest he couldn't fully identify. Pride, maybe. Something adjacent to it. Then Charlotte set down her coffee mug, and her voice changed. "I need to make a call," she said. "To Daniel. But I can't use my phone. I left it at the hotel, and I don't know if—" She stopped. Chose the next words carefully. "I need to know if anyone has been tracking my phone, before I reach out to my people." Daniel felt the weight of the situation settle fully onto him for the first time. Not just a woman who needed help. Not just a daring parking lot rescue that he'd somehow survived. Something bigger. Something with edges he couldn't see yet. "You can use mine," he said. She shook her head. "Not yet. I need to think first." She looked at Sophie. "Can she?" "Sophie." Daniel said, "Can you go watch something in your room for a little bit?" Sophie closed her book with the particular drama of someone who is being excluded from the interesting conversation. "Fine." She slid off her chair, then paused beside Charlotte and looked up at her with direct, uncomplicated 8-year-old eyes. "I hope whoever made you feel bad gets in trouble." Charlotte looked at her. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Sophie disappeared down the hallway. Charlotte waited until she heard the door click. Then she turned to Daniel and the last layer of composure she'd been maintaining. The public layer, the CEO layer, went somewhere private, and what was underneath it was a woman who was genuinely afraid and too experienced to pretend otherwise. "I was supposed to chair a board vote this Friday," she said. "A major restructuring proposal. If it passes, it changes the entire executive structure of the company. It removes a significant amount of power from certain people." She looked at him steadily. "People who have very strong reasons not to want that vote to happen." Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You think someone at the company arranged last night? I don't think I know." She said it without heat, without drama, like she was reporting a fact. "I felt it at the gala. Something wrong with the second glass of champagne. I've had a drink too many before. This wasn't that. This was clinical. Whatever I was given, it was designed to make me look incompetent, or to get me out of the building, or both. And those men were going to take me somewhere I wouldn't have come back from in time for the vote." She paused. "Or possibly at all." The kitchen was very quiet. "I've been running Titan Freight for 11 years, she said. "I know where everybody is buried metaphorically. I know which contracts were dirty, which deals were made in which rooms, which executives have been skimming and for how long." She looked at her coffee. "Knowing is not the same as being able to prove, and some people have had a long time to make sure of that." "Who?" Daniel asked. She looked at him. "Why are you asking?" "Because I put 2 men through a wall for you last night, and now those men know my face." He kept his voice level. "So I'd like to know what I walked into." Charlotte held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said Victor Kane. The name didn't mean anything to Daniel immediately. Then it did. Victor Kane, CFO of Titan Freight. He'd seen the name on internal financial documents 100 times. He'd seen the man twice, once in a company newsletter photograph, once in a hallway from a distance. Big man. Silver-haired. The kind of face that had learned decades ago to project absolute confidence whether or not it was warranted. "The CFO," Daniel said. "He's been positioning for 3 years," Charlotte said. "Quietly, carefully, building alliances on the board, moving money through subsidiary accounts in ways that are technically legal and functionally corrupt. If the restructuring vote goes through Friday, his leverage disappears. His allies lose their seats. He loses the thing he's been building toward." She set her hands flat on the table. "He's not a man who accepts losing." Daniel thought about white knuckles on a woman's arm in a hotel hallway. He thought about 2 men who moved like professionals. "You need to go to the police," he said. "With what?" She said, not unkindly. "I have no evidence of what happened last night beyond a hangover that isn't a hangover, and 1 witness. I have suspicion. I have history. I have years of watching Victor operate and knowing exactly what he's capable of." She shook her head. "A woman who runs a billion-dollar company goes to the police and says her CFO had her drugged at a party. Do you know what happens? The story leaks before morning. By the time the vote happens Friday, I'm the unstable executive who made accusations she couldn't back up. Victor wins without firing another shot." Daniel sat with that. It was he had to admit the kind of logic that held up. "So what do you do?" "I find the evidence," she said simply. "I've known for 2 years that it exists. Victor has been too careful too long for there to be no trail. There's always a trail. I just haven't been able to get to it safely." She looked at him with the directness of someone who had already run the numbers and arrived at an answer. "But you can." Daniel blinked. "Me? You're a level 4 auditor," she said. "You have internal system access. You know what to look for and how to look for it without triggering flags. And you have something more valuable than either of those things." "What's that?" "You're invisible," she said. "Victor doesn't know your name. He doesn't know your face. To him, you are nobody. And right now, nobody is exactly the right person to be." The silence stretched between them. From down the hallway came the muffled sound of Sophie's television, some cartoon cheerful and bright, a different universe. Daniel thought about 9 days until rent. About the hospital bill on the counter. about what happened to a level 4 auditor who crosses the CFO of a $30 billion company and loses. Then he thought about two men with professional hands and a woman being guided toward a door she wouldn't have come back through. "You said someone had you drugged," he said. "You said the drink went wrong. But you knew it before it fully hit you, didn't you? You were already afraid before the gala. That's why you remember fragments, because part of you was already watching for it." Charlotte looked at him carefully, like she was recalibrating. "Yes," she said. "So this has been coming for a while." "Yes. And you came to the gala anyway." "I had to. Canceling would have shown weakness. Victor would have moved up his timeline." Daniel nodded slowly. "How long have you been doing this alone?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and in the gap between those two things, he saw just for a moment how tired she was. Not the tired that sleep fixes. The deep structural tired of someone who has been holding everything together by themselves for long enough that they've forgotten what it felt like before. "Long enough," she said. He stood up, went to the counter, refilled her coffee and his own, and brought both back to the table. It was a small thing, a ridiculous, ordinary thing. She looked at the mug like he'd handed her something she'd forgotten existed. "I can't put Sophie at risk," he said. "I know. If any of this comes to my door to her, I will not let that happen," Charlotte said, and something in her voice, not softness but weight, made him believe her. "I want access to the subsidiary account records," he said, "the ones routed through the Eastern Logistics branches. I've seen discrepancies in those files for months. I flagged 2 of them, and my tickets got closed without explanation." Charlotte went very still. "Your tickets were closed 12 days ago. I was told it was a system audit, and the flags were resolved." He paused. "Were they resolved?" She looked at him. "I never saw those tickets." Something cold moved through him. If an internal audit flag from a level 4 could be buried before it reached the CEO's office, Victor's reach inside the company was deeper than Charlotte knew. Deeper than Daniel had imagined when he was just a man doing his job and trying not to notice things that were none of his business. "He's been inside your systems," Daniel said. "I need to see what you flagged," she said. Her voice had a new edge now, not anger exactly, but the specific focus that comes when suspicion becomes confirmation. "Can you access those files remotely?" "Partially. The full records are on the internal auditing server. I'd need to go in." "To the office?" "Yes." They looked at each other across the small kitchen table. Then Charlotte turned her head toward the hallway where Sophie was watching cartoons, and something moved across her face that was not quite grief and not quite recognition, but lived somewhere in between. "She's remarkable," Charlotte said quietly. "She's everything," Daniel said. It came out without permission, which was fine because it was true. "What does she wear on the chain?" Charlotte asked. "The necklace, the small silver one." Daniel's attention shifted. "You noticed that this morning. It's distinctive." Charlotte's voice was careful, measured. "The charm. It's unusual. A small compass rose." "Yeah, it was her mother's. Rebecca left it behind when—" He stopped. The word sat in his throat. "When she left. Sophie's worn it every day since. She says it helps her find her way home." Charlotte's face had gone very still. Daniel noticed. "What? That—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked at him with the expression of someone standing at the edge of something enormous and deciding whether to step. "That necklace. I've seen it before." The cartoon murmured down the hallway. "What do you mean you've seen it before?" Daniel said. "I mean—" Charlotte set both hands flat on the table like she needed to ground herself. "I mean my brother had one exactly like it. My younger brother Thomas. He was—" Her voice broke. Just for a second. A hairline fracture. "He was killed 4 years ago. Hit and run. The case was never solved. He had a compass rose charm that he carried everywhere. He said someone gave it to him, someone he'd been trying to help." The kitchen went completely silent. Daniel felt the floor do something strange beneath him. Not move, but recalibrate the way the ground feels different under your feet When you realize you've been standing somewhere you didn't know you were standing. Rebecca, he said. The word came out barely above a breath. What was your wife's last name? Charlotte asked. Her eyes hadn't moved from his. Mitchell. Rebecca Mitchell. Charlotte closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were different. Whatever calculation she'd been running since she woke up in his bedroom, whatever careful professional distance she'd been maintaining, it was gone. What was underneath it was raw, and it was real, and it changed the shape of everything. She contacted Thomas 4 years ago, Charlotte said. He told me someone on the inside had reached out to him, that she'd found something. Documents, evidence of fraud and something worse, cover-up of an accident. A death that wasn't an accident. Her jaw tightened. He was going to meet her. That was the week he died. Daniel's hands had stopped feeling like his hands. Rebecca found the evidence, he said. Not a question. Working it through out loud because his brain needed to hear it to make it real. She found it and she tried to get it out. She reached out to your brother, and then Thomas died, Charlotte said. And your wife disappeared. The cartoon down the hallway switched to something with a cheerful song. Sophie laughed at something, her small, real laugh, the one that cost nothing, and was worth everything. Daniel looked towards the hallway, then back at Charlotte. She didn't leave us, he said. The words were quiet, enormous. The size of 2 years of not sleeping right, 2 years of an 8-year-old asking quiet questions at bedtime, 2 years of a story that had never made sense finally beginning to reveal its actual shape. She didn't leave you, Charlotte said. And then before either of them could say another word, Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. He looked at Charlotte. She looked at the phone. He picked it up. Hello. Silence for 1 second. Then a voice filtered through something electronic, said 4 words with a calm that was more frightening than any anger. We know she's there. The call ended. From down the hallway, Sophie's cartoon played on, cheerful and completely unaware, while Daniel stood in his kitchen, holding a phone that had just confirmed that whatever thread his life had been hanging from for the past 2 years had just been pulled taut. Daniel set the phone face down on the counter. His hand was steady. He was surprised by the steadiness, because everything inside him was moving in multiple directions at once, like a compass dropped too close to a magnet. But his hand was steady, and he held on to that the way you hold on to whatever small thing is still solid when the ground under you shifts. Charlotte was already on her feet. How long? She said. 4 words, 30 seconds ago. He looked at her. We have to move, Sophie. Yes. Mrs. Holt, my neighbor, she has a sister in Reston, 40 minutes out. Sophie can go there. Mrs. Holt won't ask questions. He was already moving down the hallway. She's good at not asking questions. Daniel. He stopped and turned. They made the call before they moved, Charlotte said. Her voice was precise, controlled, the kind of control that is not coldness, but its opposite, a woman running very hot, keeping herself very focused. That means they want us to run. If we run blind, they know where we go. They're counting on panic. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. She was right. He knew she was right. And he hated that she was right, because what he wanted to do was put Sophie under his arm and drive until the gas ran out and figure out the rest later. How long do we have before they actually move? He said. If they were outside, they would have come already. They're watching, testing our reaction. She held his gaze. 20 minutes, maybe 30. That's enough. He went to Sophie's door and knocked twice their signal, the one they'd had since she was 5. 2 knocks meant important pay attention. Come in, Sophie said. He opened the door. She was cross-legged on her bed with her stuffed rabbit Gerald, who had been with her since she was 3 and was missing one eye and had been repaired so many times he was more patched than original, and she looked at her father's face and put Gerald down. We're going somewhere, she said. For a little bit, yeah. Is it the bad kind of going somewhere, or the okay kind? He sat on the edge of her bed, looked at his daughter, at her clear, serious eyes and the silver chain at her collar, and the careful way she was watching him. The way she'd been watching him since she was old enough to understand that sometimes grown-ups said things were fine when they weren't. It's the kind where I need you to be brave, he said. "And I need you to go with Mrs. Holt for a day or two, to her sister's place in Reston. You remember Barbara? She has the cat with the flat face." "That's the one." Sophie considered this. "Will you call me? Every night. And you'll tell me the truth about stuff. You won't just say everything's fine when it isn't." He took her face in both hands. She was so small. She was so entirely herself. "I will tell you the truth," he said. "I promise." She nodded once, solemn as a judge. Then she slid off the bed and started pulling things out of her dresser with the focused efficiency of a child who had learned early that hesitating doesn't help. He went back to the kitchen. Charlotte was standing at the window, not in front of it, beside it at the edge, looking out at the angle. She'd already figured out which part of the street would be visible to someone watching the building. "There's a gray sedan," she said, "parked across from the entrance. It was there when you drove in last night." "You checked?" Force of habit. She turned from the window. "2 occupants. They're not moving." "So they're watching, not ready to breach." "Not yet." He called Mrs. Holt. She answered on the second ring because she always answered on the second ring, a woman who had decided decades ago that people who let the phone ring more than twice were sending a message about their priorities. "Daniel, you're up early." "I need a favor," he said. "A significant one. I need you to take Sophie to Barbara's, right now this morning. I'll explain everything when I can, but right now I just need—" "I'll get my coat," she said without hesitation, without a single follow-up question, because Eleanor Holt was 71 years old and had lived enough life to recognize the sound of a person who needed help, and not an interrogation. "Thank you," he said. He meant it in a way that words weren't quite big enough for. Sophie came out of her room 8 minutes later with her backpack, Gerald tucked under one arm, and her library book, because Sophie did not go anywhere without a book, not even into uncertainty. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Charlotte. "Are you staying with my dad?" she asked. "For a little while," Charlotte said. Sophie looked at her steadily. Then she walked across the kitchen and held out Gerald. "You can borrow him. He helps when things are scary. You just have to hold him right here." She positioned the rabbit under Charlotte's arm. "And he does the rest." Charlotte looked down at the one-eyed rabbit tucked against her side. Something happened to her face. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't the kind of thing a person could plan. It was the involuntary thing that happens when a small and completely genuine act of kindness lands on a person who has spent years surrounded by people who want things from them. "Thank you," Charlotte said, and her voice was not the CEO's voice. It was just a voice. "His name is Gerald," Sophie said with the gravity of someone conveying important information. "He already knows your name, I told him." Mrs. Holt appeared at the apartment door, coat on purse on her arm, car keys already in hand, reading the room with the quick, quiet intelligence she always pretended not to have. And 5 minutes later, Sophie was gone down the stairs and into Eleanor's old Buick. And Daniel stood in his apartment doorway and listened to the car pull away from the curb and felt the specific grief of watching his daughter leave without knowing exactly when he'd see her again. He closed the door. He turned around. Charlotte was still holding Gerald. She looked at the rabbit for a moment, then set him carefully on the kitchen counter like she was placing something valuable in safekeeping. "We have maybe 15 minutes, she said. "Then let's use them." He went to his laptop on the kitchen table. "Tell me everything you know about the Eastern Logistics accounts, the subsidiary routing, the payments that shouldn't exist." She pulled a chair around to his side of the table and sat beside him, and they went to work. She talked. He typed. He accessed the internal auditing portal through the remote employee login, the same login he used every morning from this same chair for 3 years. The most ordinary thing in the world, now the most dangerous, and started pulling transaction logs from the Eastern branch accounts. The numbers were there. They'd always been there. That was the thing about financial fraud. At this level, it didn't hide the numbers, it hid the meaning of the numbers. Everything was labeled. Everything was categorized. The money moved through accounts with real names attached to real subsidiaries, doing real business. And if you looked at any single transaction, it was unremarkable. It was only when you lined them up, when you mapped the timing and the routing and the destination codes, that the shape emerged. Daniel had always been good at seeing shapes in numbers. "These transfers," he said from the Memphis Logistics Hub. October-November last year. They're coded as equipment maintenance payouts, but the vendor ID doesn't match any registered contractor in the system. What does it match? Charlotte asked. He cross-referenced. A holding company, registered in Delaware, incorporated 2 months before the transfer started. He looked at her. Who incorporates a holding company 2 months before receiving maintenance payments from a freight corporation? Someone who needed a clean vehicle for money that couldn't go anywhere obvious, she said. Keep going. He kept going. The pattern built itself as they worked, the way patterns always do when you stop looking at the parts and start looking at the intervals between them. Money leaving through maintenance codes, landing in a Delaware shell. Moving again within 72 hours to a second entity, this one registered in the Cayman Islands. Not enough to trigger automatic reporting thresholds. Never enough. Always just under the line with the precision of someone who knew exactly where the line was because they'd helped draw it. This is years of work, Daniel said. He wasn't saying it in admiration. He was saying it in the particular horror of understanding how long something had been happening right in front of him. 7 years, Charlotte said. He started the year after I promoted him. How much? She was quiet for a moment. We're looking at 40 million minimum, maybe more depending on what's in the Cayman vehicle. And the board doesn't know. The board members who matter to Victor know exactly what they need to know and nothing they don't. She exhaled. That's what the restructuring vote was going to change. New oversight committee. Independent auditing authority that doesn't root through the CFO's office. Victor would have lost the ability to keep those accounts invisible. So he had to stop the vote. By removing me from the picture. She said it plainly the way you state a fact that is terrible, but needs to be stated. If I'm discredited or missing the vote, gets postponed. Victor moves 2 of his board allies into interim authority positions. The restructuring gets buried. He keeps everything. Daniel stared at the screen, at the numbers that told a story 7 years in the making. Then he thought about something else. Something she'd said at the kitchen table before the phone rang. Thomas, he said. Your brother. You said Rebecca reached out to him, that she had documents. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Yes. If she had documents, real documents, not just what she'd seen, where would they be? 4 years ago, Rebecca worked in what department? Charlotte looked at him. She worked at Titan Freight. 3 years, he said. She was a contracts analyst in the Eastern Division. She disappeared about 8 months before I flagged those first maintenance payment discrepancies. He paused. I didn't connect it because I didn't know. I didn't know she'd found anything. She never told me. She was protecting you, Charlotte said. The words landed simply and completely the way true things do. She was protecting us, Daniel said. His voice was steady. He made it steady. So where would she have kept the documents if she was going to pass them to Thomas, and something went wrong if she had to run before the handoff happened? He stopped, stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped back. Daniel, the necklace, he said. He was already moving to the hallway. Sophie was gone, but Sophie had left Gerald. She hadn't left the necklace. She never left the necklace. She wore it every day. But there was something else. He went to his closet. High shelf back corner behind a box of Sophie's baby photos and his old tax documents. A small cardboard box he hadn't opened in almost 2 years because opening it made Rebecca's absence too specific and too heavy. He'd put it there when Sophie was 6, when he'd gone through Rebecca's remaining things, and he'd kept it without quite knowing why, the way you keep things that feel like they might matter later without being able to say how. He brought it to the kitchen table. Charlotte watched him open it. Inside a watch that didn't work anymore, some folded papers that turned out to be old birthday cards, a photograph of Rebecca and Daniel from before Sophie was born, and at the bottom a small velvet jewelry pouch, the kind that earrings come in. Daniel opened it. A USB drive. No label, no markings. Just the drive, small and dark, sitting in the folds of the velvet pouch, like it had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Charlotte looked at it, then at him. She left it. She left it knowing she couldn't come back for it, he said. She left it for someone to find, in case... His throat tightened. in case something happened to her. Or in case she needed someone to find it, and she couldn't be the one to say why. He plugged it into the laptop. It took 30 seconds to read. Then the directory opened, and what was in it, what Rebecca had apparently spent months assembling before she disappeared, was not just discrepancies. It was a complete parallel record. Emails, internal memos, photographs of physical documents. A chain of evidence so meticulous, it could only have been built by someone who knew they were building something that had to survive without them to explain it. Charlotte leaned forward. Her hand moved to the touchpad without asking, and he let her because it was her company, and her brother, and her 7 years of not being able to prove what she knew. She scrolled through the files in silence for almost 2 minutes. Daniel watched her face. He saw the moment she found it. The email. The one that wasn't about money, or not only about money. A communication between Victor Kane and 2 private contractors dated 11 days before Thomas Bennett's death, with an address, a vehicle description, a schedule. A schedule that matched the night Thomas died. Charlotte's hand stopped moving. The kitchen was absolutely quiet. "He killed him," she said. Her voice was flat and far away, like it was coming from a long distance, even though she was right beside him. He had Thomas killed because Thomas was going to receive the documents. Because once the documents were outside the company, the whole thing was over. Daniel didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He just stayed beside her while she looked at the screen and understood something she had already half known for 4 years, but had never been able to hold in her hands as fact until this moment. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry. Not because she wasn't feeling it, because she was feeling it somewhere too deep for the surface to show. "Rebecca saw this email," she said. "She must have," Daniel said. "And when Thomas died, she knew Victor knew she had it. So she ran." Charlotte's voice was careful, precise, each word placed with intention. "She ran to protect you and Sophie, because if Victor knew she had this, anyone near her was a target." Daniel pressed his palms flat on the table. Breathed. His wife had not left him. His wife had been running for 2 years, carrying a secret that could destroy a powerful man, staying far enough away to keep her family safe and alone enough to keep the evidence from being found. He thought about Sophie at bedtime, asking quiet questions. He thought about the compass rose charm at Sophie's collar. She says it helps her find her way home. His jaw tightened until it ached. "We copy the drive," he said. "Everything. Multiple copies. We get it to someone outside the company, outside Victor's reach before tonight. And we make sure Victor knows that destroying us doesn't destroy the evidence, that it's already out." "I know a federal prosecutor," Charlotte said. "Martin Webb. He's been looking at corporate fraud for 3 years. He's not connected to Victor. He's not connected to any of our board." She paused. "But making contact means surfacing. It means letting Victor know we're moving." "He already knows we're here," Daniel said. "Making contact means the timeline accelerates. He won't wait and watch anymore." "Then we don't give him time to plan," Daniel said. "We move first." Charlotte looked at him. Really looked at him the way she had in the hotel hallway when she was deciding whether to trust him, but different now, without the calculation, without the measuring, just direct. "You're not what I expected," she said. "You didn't know I existed 2 days ago." "No," she said. "I didn't." A pause. "I should have." Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. Not an unknown number this time. The screen read "Building Security," which meant the call was coming through his building's intercom system, which meant someone was at the front door of his building pressing the call button for his unit. He answered. Static. Then a voice, not electronic this time, not filtered. A real voice. A woman's voice, low and careful, saying, "Daniel, it's me. Please don't hang up. It's Rebecca. I'm outside. I've been watching the building for an hour. I need to know if Sophie is safe, and then I need to come up. There are people coming and I don't have much time. Please." Daniel's hand holding the phone had stopped being steady. Charlotte was watching his face. He pressed the door release without saying a word. The footsteps on the stairs were careful, measured. The footsteps of someone who had spent 2 years learning how to move through the world without being heard, Daniel stood at the open apartment door and listened to them come up, and he felt something happening in his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Not quite hope, not quite anger, not quite grief, but a compound of all three pressing against his ribs from the inside like something that had been held underwater for a very long time and was finally irreversibly rising. She appeared at the top of the stairwell. Rebecca Mitchell was 34 years old and looked like someone who had lived 40 of them in the past 2 years. She was thinner than he remembered. Her hair was shorter, darker cut close in a way that changed the shape of her face. She was wearing a jacket 2 sizes too large and carrying a backpack that looked like it had been lived out of for months. Her eyes found his immediately and stayed there, and in them, he saw the thing he hadn't let himself imagine, the thing he'd actively worked to stop imagining, because imagining it made the alternative too unbearable. She was terrified, and she was relieved, both at once, so completely mixed together they were indistinguishable. "Hey," she said. The word came out wrecked. "Hey," he said back. His voice didn't sound like his voice. She stopped 2 feet from the door, like she wasn't sure she had permission to come closer. Like crossing the threshold was something that required his permission in a way it once hadn't. "Sophie," she started. "She's safe," he said. "She's with Mrs. Holt. She's out of the building." Rebecca closed her eyes. The relief that moved through her body was physical. He could see it go through her top to bottom, like a current. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet, and she pressed her lips together hard, and breathed through her nose, and did not let herself fall apart, because Rebecca had never let herself fall apart, not once in the 8 years he'd known her, and apparently 2 years of running hadn't changed that. "Okay," she said. "Okay, good. Come inside," he said. Not warm, not cold, just the fact of it. She came in. She stopped when she saw Charlotte sitting at the kitchen table, and the 2 women looked at each other across the small apartment, in the way that people look at each other when they have been connected by enormous invisible forces for years, without ever occupying the same room. Charlotte stood up slowly. "You're Thomas's contact," Charlotte said. Not a question. Rebecca's jaw worked. "You're his sister. I've seen your photograph." Her voice dropped. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about Thomas. I have been every day I have been sorry about what happened to him." "Did you know it was going to happen?" Charlotte asked. The words were precise, not accusatory exactly, but the need behind them was real. "No," Rebecca said. "I swear to you I did not know they were watching him. I thought I was the only one they were tracking. I didn't know they'd connected him to me until after—" She stopped, swallowed. "Until after. And by then I couldn't come forward because Victor already had people inside the police department. Filing a report would have been—" She looked at Daniel. "You would have been next. Sophie would have been—" "Stop," Daniel said, quietly. "Come sit down." She sat. He sat across from her. Charlotte sat to the side between them, and for a moment nobody said anything. The 3 of them at the kitchen table in the morning light with a USB drive full of evidence and a gray sedan parked outside and a board vote happening in 2 days. "How long have you been in the city?" Daniel asked. 8 days, Rebecca said. "I've been trying to find a way in. A way to get the evidence out without leading them directly to you." She looked at the laptop, at the drive plugged into the side of it. Her eyes widened slightly. "You found it." "It was in your jewelry box," Daniel said. "At the bottom. I kept it. I didn't know why. Something moved across her face. Gratitude, grief, love, guilt, all of it too tangled to separate. I left it in the most obvious place I could think of that they wouldn't look, because you were the only person I trusted to find it eventually." She looked at him directly. "I'm sorry. I know what me leaving did to you, to Sophie. I know there is no explanation that makes that okay." "No," he said. "There isn't." "Daniel, tell me what you know," he said. "All of it. Everything from the beginning. We can talk about the rest when Sophie is safe and Victor Kane is in handcuffs. But right now, I need to know what we're working with." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. She told them. She had started noticing the discrepancies 14 months before she disappeared. Small things, at first vendor payments in the Eastern contracts that didn't have corresponding service records, purchase orders that were authorized at a level above what the amount required, timing patterns in the reimbursements that made no business sense unless you understood they weren't business payments at all. She'd flagged 2 of them internally. Both flags disappeared within a week without explanation. When she looked for who had closed them, the system showed the closures authorized by a username that no longer existed in the employee directory. She kept digging. She was careful. She worked at night from terminals other than her own accessing records she was technically authorized to view and making sure she never accessed the same file twice from the same machine. It took 4 months. By the end of those 4 months, she had enough to understand not just that money was being stolen, but who was dying to keep it quiet. There was a truck driver, she said, Jimmy Calhoun. He worked the Memphis to Nashville route. He saw something he shouldn't have a pickup at a distribution point that wasn't on any manifest 2 men loading cargo into an unmarked truck at 2 a.m. He filed a driver incident report. She paused. He died 6 weeks later. Single car accident on a dry road at noon. Charlotte's face was still. That was before Thomas, Rebecca said. That was what made me understand this wasn't just financial fraud. Victor was protecting the operation with force. Anyone who got close enough to see it clearly. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. What's the operation? Charlotte said. The money we can see. The shell companies. What is the money for? Rebecca looked at her steadily. The subsidiary accounts aren't just laundering Victor's personal theft. He's been running a secondary contracting network through Titan Freight's logistics infrastructure. Off-book shipping. Clients who don't exist in any official manifest. Cargo that moves through your distribution centers at night, on routes that don't appear in any system. She paused. I don't know exactly what the cargo is. I was never able to get close enough to that layer. But the payment structure, the clients, the security around those routes. She let the implication settle. He's been using my company, Charlotte said. Her voice was absolutely flat. Using our trucks, our drivers, our warehouses. She stopped. And our people have been dying to keep it secret. Jimmy Calhoun, Rebecca said. Thomas, 2 other drivers in the past 3 years who died in accidents that were ruled non-suspicious. I have records on all 4 of them in the drive. Daniel had been listening and simultaneously looking at the transaction logs on the screen, and something was assembling itself in his auditor's mind. The part of him that was trained to find the load-bearing structure inside a complex of numbers, the single thread that if you pulled it, brought the whole architecture visible. The board vote, he said. Both women looked at him. Charlotte's restructuring proposal, the new oversight committee. You said it would root auditing authority independently of the CFO's office. He looked at Charlotte. But it's more than that, isn't it? The new oversight structure would also require independent review of all distribution center operations, including the night routes. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, that provision is in the proposal. I put it there because I'd had a vague feeling for 2 years that something was happening in the overnight logistics that I couldn't see clearly. I didn't have specifics. I just had instinct. She paused. Victor would have known what that provision meant for his operation. The restructuring vote isn't just a threat to his financial fraud, Daniel said. It's a threat to the entire secondary operation. If independent auditors get access to the distribution center records, the night routes surface. The off-books clients surface. Everything surfaces. So removing me from the picture before Friday, Charlotte said, wasn't about the boardroom politics, Daniel finished. It was about survival. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street below. Normal, ordinary city sound. Impossible to reconcile with what was sitting on this table. The federal prosecutor, Daniel said. Charlotte mentioned Martin Webb. Do you know that name? Rebecca's eyes sharpened. Webb has been building a RICO case for 18 months. I know because I tried to contact him 8 months ago through an intermediary. The intermediary got spooked before the contact was made, and I had to disappear again. She leaned forward. But if you can get to Webb directly, not through channels directly, and give him the drive, he has enough infrastructure already in place to move fast. He's been waiting for documentary evidence. He has subpoenas ready. He just needs the thread. We're the thread, Charlotte said. You're the thread, Rebecca said. Charlotte Bennett walking into Webb's office with a drive full of records and a witness account of being drugged at a corporate event that's not a tip. That's a case. Charlotte looked at Daniel. He looked at her. Webb's office is in the federal building on Elm, Charlotte said. 22 minutes from here. Through downtown, Daniel said. Past the route the gray sedan can cover. So we don't go through downtown. Charlotte. He said her name with the particular weight of someone who is about to say the thing everyone in the room is thinking, but hasn't said yet. You walk into that federal building, and Victor finds out in an hour, maybe less. Whatever contacts he has in law enforcement. I know, she said. The moment you make that move, he knows the evidence is out, and he has nothing left to lose by coming at us directly. I know that too. So we need to make sure Sophie stays where she is and stays safe no matter what happens in the next 24 hours. Already thinking about it, Rebecca said quietly. Both of them looked at her. Barbara's house in Reston. I know the address. I can get someone there, someone I trust. A woman named Karen Shields who's been helping me for 14 months to be a second layer of protection. Karen's a former state trooper. She knows how to be invisible, and she knows how to handle a threat. She looked at Daniel. If you'll let me. He studied his ex-wife, the woman who had left to protect him and been gone long enough for Sophie to grow 2 inches and lose her first 4 teeth and learn to read chapter books, and he felt the anger and the grief and the love, all tangled up together in a way he knew he'd have to spend a long time unwinding later. But later was later. Make the call, he said. Rebecca took out a phone, a prepaid small, the kind you buy with cash, and stepped into the hallway. Charlotte moved to the laptop and began copying the drive contents methodically to 3 separate cloud accounts that weren't connected to Titan Freight systems. Her personal accounts private and compartmentalized, the kind she'd set up years ago with the specific understanding that there might come a day when she needed storage Victor Kane couldn't touch. Daniel watched her work. You prepared for this, he said. I prepared for the possibility, she said. I hoped I was being paranoid. You weren't. No. She clicked through the upload screens with focused precision. I wasn't. Rebecca came back in. Karen is on her way to Reston. She'll be in position within the hour. Good, Daniel said. He stood up. Then here's what we do. Charlotte goes to Webb's office. Not alone, I go with her. You. He looked at Rebecca. You stay off the street. Victor's people are looking for Charlotte, and they know my face. They don't necessarily know you're here. That's an advantage. If something goes wrong at the federal building, if they intercept us before we get to Webb, you're the backup. You have the cloud account information. Charlotte read off 3 account passwords. Daniel repeated them back. Rebecca memorized them without writing them down. If we don't contact you within 2 hours, Daniel said to Rebecca, you call Webb's office directly. You use the name James Whitfield. That was my college roommate. His name means nothing to Victor, and you say the package is in the cloud. Webb will know what that means if his team has been building this case. Rebecca looked at him. You've never done anything like this in your life. I've never needed to, he said. Doesn't mean I can't. She almost smiled. It was a small, broken thing barely there, but it was real. No, she said. It doesn't. He turned to Charlotte. Ready? She closed the laptop, picked up her heels, looked at them, then put them back down. Flat shoes were faster, and looked at Daniel in his blazer from last night's gala creased and lived in. You look like you've been awake for 24 hours, she said. I have been awake for 24 hours. Martin Webb is going to love you. They went out the door. The stairs were fast. At the building entrance, Daniel paused and looked through the glass at the gray sedan across the street. Still there. 2 shapes in the front seat. Back exit, he said. Does your building have a back exit? It has a parking garage with an exit onto Meridian Street. He glanced at her. I've lived here 3 years. I know every way in and out. They went through the garage. His truck was there. He took it. He pulled out onto Meridian without headlights for the first block, then cut north, then east, taking the long route through the residential streets that no one who didn't live in this neighborhood would know to take. In the passenger seat, Charlotte had her hands folded in her lap. Controlled. Contained. The CEO. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things for 12 hours, she said. "Don't stop now. When Victor had you drugged, when you were in that hotel hallway, and I asked you to come with me." He kept his eyes on the road. "You didn't know me. I was nobody to you. Why did you trust me?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "You had a split lip," she said finally. "What?" "You'd already been hit. I could see from the hallway that you'd been in a fight, and you were crouching in front of me with a split lip and a blazer that didn't quite fit, and you said—" She paused. "You said, 'I'm taking you somewhere safe,' not, 'I'm taking you to the hospital,' or 'I'm calling security,' or 'Do you know who I am?' You said somewhere safe." She looked at his profile. "I've had bodyguards. I've had a security detail. Not one of them ever just said somewhere safe. They always said something that was really about liability." A beat. "You just said safe." Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "That's a low bar." "Yes," she said. "It is. And you cleared it without knowing it was there." They drove. The city moved around them, morning traffic people heading to work, a world operating on a completely different frequency from the one they were living in. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "Mrs. Holt Sophie is teaching Barbara's cat to high-five. Update us when you can." He almost laughed. He felt the almost laugh like a physical thing, a bubble of something in his chest that couldn't quite break the surface. "She's okay," he said mostly to himself. "She's going to be fine," Charlotte said. Not a guess. A commitment. The federal building came into view 8 minutes later. Charlotte sat up straighter. Daniel pulled into a parking structure 2 blocks away, which gave them a covered approach. They were halfway to the elevator when Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number. He stopped, looked at it. Charlotte looked at him. He answered. "Mr. Carr?" Victor Kane's voice was exactly what Daniel would have imagined if he'd taken the time to imagine it, deep, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been certain of his position for so long that uncertainty had become a theoretical concept. "I think we should talk before you do something irreversible." Daniel felt Charlotte go very still beside him. She'd heard the voice. She recognized it. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the way you look when you hear a sound that has meant threat for years. "I'm listening," Daniel said. "You're about to walk into a federal building with a woman who has had a very destabilizing week and a collection of files that I promise you are more complicated than they appear." The voice was smooth, patient, like a man who has had this conversation before and knows exactly where all the exits are. "I understand you're trying to do the right thing. I can respect that. It takes courage. But what you don't understand, what Ms. Bennett hasn't told you, is what happens to people around her when these situations escalate." "Like Tommy Bennett," Daniel said. A pause, the first pause. "That's a serious accusation," Victor said. "The documents think so too," Daniel said. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that means a calculation is being run. "Mr. Carr?" The patience in the voice had acquired an edge. Just a thin one. The edge of a man who is deciding between 2 modes of operation. "You have a daughter." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. "Yes," he said. "I do." He kept his voice level. He made it level the same way he'd made his hand steady at the kitchen counter, the same way he'd made himself walk toward 2 large men in a hotel hallway. Not because he wasn't afraid. Because the fear had nowhere useful to go, and the other direction was the only direction that mattered. And she's somewhere you'll never find her. And the files are somewhere you'll never reach them. And right now the only question is whether you want the next 24 hours to go the way you're planning or the way I'm planning. He paused. "I've been awake all night. I'm not in a negotiating mood. We're going in." He ended the call. Charlotte looked at him. "You just told him we're going in," she said. "He already knew we were going in," Daniel said. "I just took the surprise away so he knows a move on us right now is too late." He put the phone in his pocket. "Walk fast." They walked fast. The lobby of the federal building had security metal detectors, guards the particular institutional gravity of a place that takes itself seriously. Daniel emptied his pockets. Charlotte stated her name. The guard looked at her the way you look at someone when the name they've given you is larger than the moment you're in. They were directed to the 11th floor. Martin Webb was a compact man in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the desk of someone who had been buried in work for long enough to stop being bothered by it. He stood up when his assistant showed them in, and he looked at Charlotte Bennett, the way Daniel had looked at the numbers on the screen that morning, with the recognition of someone seeing a shape they've been waiting to see clearly for a very long time. "Ms. Bennett," he said. "Mr. Webb," she said. "I'm going to save us both some time. I have documentary evidence of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder, all connected to a current executive of Titan Freight Corporation. I have a witness. I have a chain of custody for the documents. And I have about 18 hours before a corporate board vote that the man behind all of this needs to control." She set the USB drive on his desk. "Tell me you've been building this case." Webb looked at the drive, then at Daniel, then back at Charlotte. "Sit down," he said. They sat. And Webb reached for the drive with the deliberate, focused movement of a man who had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment, and the thing that Victor Kane had spent 7 years building carefully, brutally, at the cost of 4 lives and 1 family, and 1 woman's 2-year exile, and 1 8-year-old girl's quiet bedtime questions, began at last to come apart. Martin Webb did not waste time. That was the first thing Daniel noticed about the man. He didn't perform urgency. He just moved inside it naturally the way certain people do, when they've spent enough years working toward a single point that the moment of arrival doesn't require ceremony. He looked at the drive for approximately 4 seconds, called his assistant, said 3 words, "Get me Kowalski." And by the time Daniel and Charlotte had finished the first account of what had happened at the gala, a second attorney and a forensic analyst were in the room. They stayed in that office for 3 hours. Daniel talked. Charlotte talked. Webb asked questions that were precise and undecorated, not the questions of someone building a narrative, but the questions of someone stress-testing a structure, looking for the load-bearing walls, identifying what would hold and what needed reinforcement. The forensic analyst copied the drive and began running authentication protocols. The second attorney, Kowalski, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s who wrote everything by hand in a yellow legal pad, kept circling back to the 4 deaths. Jimmy Calhoun, Thomas Bennett, the 2 drivers, and the documentation Rebecca had assembled, connecting the timing of each death to the movement of money through Victor's shell accounts. At one point, Webb leaned back in his chair, took his glasses off his forehead, cleaned them on his shirt, and said to no one in particular, 7 years. He had 7 years in that company. He was patient, Charlotte said. Patience isn't a virtue in fraud, Webb said. It's a weapon. He put his glasses back. The night routing operation, the off-books cargo that's going to open a second investigation that goes beyond Titan Freight. We're going to need to involve 2 other agencies. How long before you can move on, Kane? Charlotte asked. Webb looked at his watch, then at the forensic analyst. Authentication status. Chain of custody is clean, the analyst said without looking up. File metadata is consistent. I'm not seeing any indication of tampering. We move today, Webb said. He looked at Charlotte. The board vote is Friday morning, 9 a.m. Kane will be in custody before midnight tonight. He said it the way you state a weather forecast, not a promise, but the result of reading conditions carefully. The charges will be sealed until we execute. I don't want him running. He won't run, Charlotte said. He doesn't think he needs to. He still believes he controls the situation. He believed that 20 minutes ago, Daniel said. He called me on the way here. Webb looked at him sharply. He called you. He mentioned my daughter. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when a line has been identified that should not have been crossed. That goes in the record, Webb said. That is attempted witness intimidation, and it goes in the record right now. He looked at Kowalski. She was already writing. He looked back at Daniel. Your daughter is safe. She's in Reston, with protection. Keep her there until we confirm arrest. He stood up, which seemed to be his signal that the meeting was entering its next phase. Ms. Bennett, I'm going to need you to remain available. Mr. Carr, I'm going to need a formal statement. My assistant will set you up in the conference room, and I need contact information for the third witness. Rebecca Mitchell, Daniel said. Webb's pen stopped moving. Rebecca Mitchell, the contracts analyst who disappeared from Titan Freight 2 years ago. She assembled most of what's on that drive, Daniel said. She's been in the city for 8 days. She's been trying to find a safe way to surface. Webb set his pen down with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a response. Mr. Carr, do you understand that Rebecca Mitchell has been listed as a missing person for 22 months, that her case has been open with the Metropolitan Police Department for nearly 2 years? I understand it now, Daniel said. I need to speak with her, Webb said. Today, before we move on Kane, her testimony about the documents, the chain of custody, the contact with Thomas Bennett. It's not just useful, it is essential to the murder charges holding up. He looked at Daniel directly. Can you get her here? Daniel took out his phone and called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring. Are you okay? We're in Webb's office, he said. He needs you here, today. It's safe. A silence. Not long. But the kind of silence that contains a significant amount of living. Okay, she said. I'll come. She arrived 40 minutes later. Go. Daniel was in the hallway outside Webb's office when she came off the elevator, and he watched her walk toward him. The careful walk, the too large jacket, the backpack that had been her whole life for 2 years, and he felt everything that had been pressing against the inside of his chest all morning. Shift, settle, reconfigure into something he didn't have a word for yet, but knew he'd be working out for a long time. She stopped in front of him. How is it going in there? She asked. Webb knows what he's doing, he said. He's been building toward this for 3 years. We just gave him the walls and the roof. She nodded, looked at her hands, then at him. I know there's a lot, she said, between us. I know I can't just walk back into your life and Sophie's life and expect Rebecca. He said her name the way he'd said safe in the hotel hallway, not as a reassurance, as a fact. Go talk to Webb. Give him everything. Then we'll figure out the rest. One thing at a time. One thing at a time, she repeated softly, like it was a principle she'd forgotten and was glad to hear again. She went in. Daniel sat in a chair in the hallway outside the office and put his head back against the wall and let himself, for the first time in 26 hours, stop moving. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Holt. Sophie wants to know if she can get a flat-faced cat. I told her to ask you. She said you'll say yes because you feel guilty. She's 8, Daniel. 8. He smiled. His face felt strange, doing it like a muscle he hadn't used in a while, suddenly asked to perform. But it was real. He typed back, tell her we'll discuss it. And tell her I love her. 3 seconds later, she says she loves you too, and also yes means yes. He put his phone in his pocket and looked at the ceiling of the federal building hallway and thought about 7 years of careful corruption and 4 people who were dead and 1 woman who had run for 2 years, carrying evidence in a USB drive in a velvet pouch, and 1 8-year-old girl wearing a Compass Rose charm that had been passed between 3 people who were all in their different ways trying to find their way back to something true. He thought about a hotel parking lot and 2 large men and a woman in a steel gray gown with her feet dragging slightly. He thought about the moment he dropped his coat on a chair and walked. He still couldn't fully explain that moment. Not the heroic version that the story might want him to give. He hadn't been thinking about right and wrong in any abstract sense, hadn't been calculating risk and reward. He'd just seen something wrong happening to a human being, and his legs had started moving before his brain had finished the sentence. Maybe that was what courage actually was, not the absence of calculation, the absence of the pause between seeing and doing. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. When he opened them, Charlotte was standing in the hallway. She'd borrowed a jacket from someone in the office. It was slightly too large, which would have looked undignified on the Charlotte Bennett who walked into galas in steel gray gowns, but looked completely right on the Charlotte Bennett who was standing in a federal building hallway after a 26-hour night holding a cup of coffee she'd clearly gotten for him. She held it out. He took it. She sat in the chair beside him. Webb is moving, she said. He's coordinating with the Financial Crimes Unit and the U.S. Marshals. The arrest warrant is being processed. How long? He said by 8 tonight. He wants Kane at home, not at the office. Easier to control the news cycle if it happens away from the building. And Friday's vote. Still happening, she said. Webb actually wants it to happen. He wants Kane's allies on the board to show up and cast their votes before they know the arrest is coming. It documents the conspiracy on the corporate level. Shows who knew what. She paused. I'll be in that boardroom tomorrow morning. You're going to walk in there after all of this, Daniel said, and just chair a board meeting. Yes. That's either the most professional thing I've ever heard or the most terrifying. In my experience, those are often the same thing. She looked at him sideways. There was something in her expression he hadn't seen before or hadn't seen clearly until now. Something lighter. Not lighter as in less serious, but lighter as in a weight removed the way a person's posture changes when they've been carrying something for long enough and finally set it down. You should know that what you did last night this morning, all of it goes considerably beyond anything I had the right to expect from you. You didn't expect anything from me, he said. You didn't know I existed. I know, she said. That was my failure. She held his gaze. When this is over, and it will be over properly over, I intend to correct that. Professionally. She paused. Your audit flags. The ones that were buried. I want to know every one of them. And I want you leading the internal review team that goes through the Eastern Division accounts. He looked at her. I'm a level 4 auditor. You were a level 4 auditor, she said. As of this morning, I'm not entirely sure that level exists anymore. At least not for you. He didn't know what to say to that, so he drank his coffee instead. It was good coffee. The federal government apparently had decent coffee. They sat together in the hallway and didn't say anything for a while, which was its own kind of communication, the kind that only exists between people who have been through something real together and don't need to perform the aftermath. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Webb's office confirmed the warrant. At 6:15, his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. Then a second message. It's Kowalski. Webb asked me to tell you it's done. Kane is in custody. No incident. A pause. Then, your family is safe, Mr. Carr. All of them. Daniel read the message twice. He was sitting in this conference room where he'd given his formal statement 3 hours earlier alone. A cold cup of coffee beside him and a yellow legal pad full of Kowalski's handwriting on the table across from where he'd been sitting. He read the message a third time. Then he put his phone face down on the table and pressed both palms flat on the surface and breathed. Just breathed. The specific breathing of someone who has been holding something at bay for a very long time and has just been given permission to stop. He called Mrs. Holt. It's over, he said when she picked up. You can bring her home. A pause. Then Eleanor Holt said with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had not asked questions and had therefore always known she'd get to hear this, I'll have her there by 8. Thank you, Eleanor, he said. I mean it. I know you do, she said. She wants to talk to you. A shuffling sound. Then Sophie's voice, bright and immediate. Daddy, Barbara's cat learned to high five. I taught him. His name is officially Gerald II now, and I think we should get one. Hi, baby, he said. His voice came out wrong, too full, too much in it. He cleared his throat. I missed you. A tiny pause on her end. Sophie processing the sound of his voice. Are you okay? She asked. The 8-year-old judge, precise and gentle. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. I'm really okay. Is the coworker okay too? He almost laughed again. This time it broke the surface. Yeah, she's okay too. Good, Sophie said with finality. Because Gerald is at your house and I need to come get him. Also, I'm hungry. Barbara only has soup. I'll make eggs, he said. Again. I'll make pancakes. Deal, she said. Bye, Daddy. I love you. I love you more, he said. More than everything. She hung up because Sophie always hung up first, decisively, once the important things had been said, because she'd learned that from him, and he'd learned it from a father who believed that you said what mattered, and then you got on with the living. He sat in the conference room for another minute. Then he stood up, put on his blazer, the one that didn't quite fit the one that had been pressed the night before, while his daughter watched from the doorway, and he went out into the hallway. Rebecca was there. Leaning against the wall outside Webb's office, eyes closed, arms folded across her chest, the backpack finally off her shoulders, and sitting on the floor beside her feet. She looked for the first time since she'd appeared at the top of his stairwell, like she'd been given permission to stop moving. She opened her eyes when she heard his footsteps. "Kane's arrested," he said. She closed her eyes again, briefly, then opened them. "Webb told me. He's holding me for a deposition tomorrow morning." She looked at Daniel. "After that..." She stopped. "I don't know what after that looks like. For me. For us." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm not going to pretend 2 years didn't happen. I'm not going to ask you to act like it didn't." "Good," he said. "Because it happened. And we're going to have to talk about it. A lot. For a long time. With Sophie in the middle of it." He paused. "She's 8. She's smart. She's going to have questions." "I know. And I'm not going to protect her from the honest answers." "I wouldn't want you to," Rebecca said. "She deserves the honest answers." Her voice was quiet, but it was solid. The voice of someone who has spent 2 years making hard decisions and is ready to start making different ones. "She's coming home tonight," Daniel said. Rebecca looked at him. In her eyes, behind all the exhaustion and the guilt and the complicated architecture of 2 years of survival, something opened. Something that had been held shut for a long time. "Can I be there?" she asked. He looked at his ex-wife, at this woman who had run to protect his daughter and spent 2 years living without both of them to make sure the thing she'd found would eventually find the right hands and do what it needed to do. He looked at her and thought about the Compass Rose charm and finding your way home and the particular courage of someone who stays invisible so that the people they love can stay safe. "Yeah," he said. "Be there." The next morning, Charlotte Bennett walked into the Titan Freight Corporation boardroom at 8:59, 1 minute before the scheduled start of the vote, in a charcoal suit that was not the color of the moon or the sky, but simply her own, and she sat at the head of the table and looked at the board members assembled around it, including 2 men who had spent the week expecting to hear that she wouldn't be coming, and she said without preamble, "Let's call the meeting to order." The vote on the restructuring proposal took 11 minutes. It passed. By 9:30, the news of Victor Kane's arrest had broken publicly, and by 10 o'clock, 3 of his board allies had already retained lawyers, and 2 of them were cooperating with Webb's office. The secondary investigation into the off-books logistics operation expanded within 48 hours to include 2 federal agencies and a separate inquiry in 2 other states. It would be a long investigation, the kind that takes years to fully prosecute, the kind where the beginning is an arrest and the end is something larger and slower and more important than any single moment. But it began. Properly. Finally. It began. Daniel Carr received a formal letter from Titan Freight Corporation's executive office 14 days later. He read it at the kitchen table over breakfast with Sophie across from him, eating toast and reading a chapter book, and not particularly interested in the letter unless it involved her directly. It offered him a position as Director of Internal Audit Operations Eastern Division, with a salary that solved every open number in the math he'd been running in his head for 2 years. With a mandate to rebuild the audit infrastructure from the ground up with full authority and full access reporting directly to the CEO's office. He read it twice. Sophie looked up from her book. "Is it good news or bad news?" "Good news," he said. "How good?" He looked at his daughter, at her clear eyes and her sideways morning hair and the Compass Rose charm at her collar, which she still wore every day, which she would keep wearing because some things mean something specific, and you don't stop carrying them just because the story around them changes. "The kind that takes a while to understand," he said. Sophie nodded satisfied. "Those are the best kind," she said with the authority of someone who knew this from experience and went back to her book. He folded the letter and set it down and looked out the window at the ordinary morning at the city, going about its business at the frequency that had nothing to do with hotel hallways and USB drives and federal warrants. And he thought about a night 3 weeks ago when he'd been standing at the exit of a corporate gala with his coat in his hand and his keys in his pocket and a plan to survive 2 hours and go home. He thought about dropping his coat on a chair. He thought about walking. Some things he understood now begin not with planning or heroism, or the right moment presenting itself cleanly, but with a single step taken before the second guessing catches up. With the part of a person that knows what's right, operating just slightly faster than the part that calculates what's safe. He had been nobody. Level 4. Invisible. And sometimes invisible was exactly the right thing to be right up until the moment it wasn't. He picked up his coffee, and the morning light came through the window, and Sophie turned a page, and outside, the city kept moving full of people living their ordinary lives, holding their invisible threads, not yet knowing which step would be the one that changed everything. For Daniel Carr, that step was already behind him. And everything it had set in motion, the truth, the justice, the long and imperfect road back to his family, was just beginning to arrive.